All right, my English teacher friends. So this was a popular request, a follow-up video to the writing workshop I did for the lottery and a few of the other common popular short stories that we tend to teach, not just in AP literature, but across the board. So one of the fan favorites is A Good Man is Hard to Find. So I did put a little bit of an AP literature spin on this, but I think for those teachers who want to use this for gen ed purposes as well, perhaps in the lower grade levels, totally accessible and will work. So here's the kicker with this. Um, you'll find that I'm going to stick to the status quo. If you're familiar with my work and especially how I tackle FRQ1 and FRQ2 for the lit exam, the templates are universal. They do not change. So even though we have a brand new short story in front of us, we are going to approach this essay the exact same way as every other writing workshop video you've ever seen me produce. So we're going to be talking in terms of declaring and inverting the thesis, tackling all body paragraphs syllogistically. So let's jump right in. So this is a special request for a number of people in my own Facebook group called Teachers Making Better Writers. So if you're not familiar with that Facebook group, go check it out. So there's quite a bit of activity and we talk all things writing in there. So Teachers Making Better Writers. So as always, when I work with teachers, I say you gotta Bob Ross your instruction, provide plenty of models and exemplars. So it's very easy to assign writing, but it's a whole other ball game when we explicitly teach it. So if you're going to do this writing workshop with your students, I encourage you to be the expert writer in the classroom and write a few introductions for your kids and write a couple of syllogistic body paragraphs for your kids as well. Use my exemplars and models that I have here featured for you. You have total access to this if you want to use it. But I think it's really good practice for teachers to model for their students how they write, and it really demystifies the process. So try your hand, be a Bob Ross at composition, and paint with your students. So the very first question we have to ask ourselves is this: how do I write the introductory paragraph? And as always, we can declare or invert the thesis. But here's the kicker. We know from past precedent that when we perform literary analysis, it's always best to invert the thesis. We use the declarative for rhetorical analysis. So when with my students and when I write, I always declare the thesis for rhetorical analysis. For synthesis, argument, persuasion, and research, it's a 50-50 coin flip. It's totally contingent upon the prompt. You can either declare or invert. But for the purposes of literary analysis, it's always best to go with this guy, the inverted thesis. So in this case, you end with the thesis. You focus on the sentence constructs. So again, those that are familiar with my work, you know that I am a big believer, big proponent of Strunk and White's assertion in rule number 18 in their seminal text called Write It Right, that there's 12 different ways to write a single sentence. So you're going to see my students manipulate their syntax quite well for the purposes of achieving voice, rhythm, and flow. There's something that we do in what I call the Nuance Academy, and all of my students run the gamut through that, and they become really good at going for the pizzazz point, going for the sophistication point. You're also going to see a fair amount of tier 2 level vocabulary. It is an academic paper, so I do like to see a fair amount of SAT level caliber words. I want the diction elevated, and that's what I mean by tier 2. Students also in the introduction provide a little bit of context and background, and then all introductions are going to be 4 sentences long. No more, no less. Always 4 sentences long. So we have a few models for you that you can look at to kind of unpack what we mean here. So here's the kicker though, especially for FRQ1 and FRQ2 on the lit exam. And I state these rules even when I'm teaching 7th and 8th graders, I have the exact same rules. Implicit in every prompt. If the prompt is intentional and setting kids up to write plot analysis and not, sorry, I'm going to rephrase that. If the prompt is intentional in setting the kids up to write literary analysis and not plot analysis, then implicit, you're going to have two questions. What is the authorial intent? And how does the author construct meaning? For the younger kids, I talk about universal theme instead of authorial intent. And construction of meaning is just what are the literary terms, devices the author uses to make meaning. So, if the essential thing going on in a short story or a poem is the extended metaphor, then you probably want to mention that in your thesis statement. So looking at those terms and or devices. So these two questions are going to be answered in the introductory paragraph. What is the authorial intent? That's going to take 3 sentences. And then lastly, how does the author construct meaning is the thesis. So that's why we call it the inverted thesis. And you're going to use your terms and devices. So let's see how this looks. Morality in and of itself is mere pretext if one is not right size with the God of their understanding. And that's kind of the whole aha of this short story, right? So the irony is that moral codes rooted in self-righteousness and hypocrisy can be more damning than the ethics of what may be perceived as pure evil. To some extent, especially with the receiving of grace, it is better to be immoral and true to oneself instead of disingenuous in the eyes of your maker. So now we're 3 sentences in. We've got to the authorial intent. That's the whole aha, the ta-da of the short story, right? In those 3 sentences. It's the exigence. In the last sentence, get to the heart of the terms and devices, the construction of meaning. Thematically, this exploration of the nature of goodness is what fuels the character development of both the grandmother and the misfit. So this student is making the assertion that the characterization and the themes of this goodness, badness, this moral debate is what fuels this short story. So theme and characterization. And that's totally fine. I think this student is absolutely 100% correct. Student number 2 is going to manipulate the template the exact same way. First 3 sentences, authorial intent. 4th sentence, construction of meaning, drop the terms, devices. So let's see how they do it here. People almost invariably arrive at their moral beliefs unthinkingly. What one prioritizes as being essential to their sense of what is good is predominantly self-serving and not grounded in anything that is rational or objective. As a result, what it means to be a good person is in the eyes of a beholder who's inherently flawed and limited by their subjective and restrictive sense of humanity. Now we are 3 sentences in. Look at the shift. Both the grandmother and the misfit exist within these contradictory moral lines, but in the end, as both their characters depict, moral wrongs can be rather righteous. That's ingenious. That's such a good intro. They read the story correctly, definitely got to the authorial intent, and definitely got to the construction of meaning. So let's go back to the first one. Do you see all the tier 2 in here? The kid is definitely in his wheelhouse, right? It doesn't sound contrived. It doesn't sound pretentious, but this kid definitely can wield some words, right? It's an academic paper. Good words like disingenuous. I like that kind of stuff. Hypocrisy, moral codes, mere pretext, right? So the kid is in his wheelhouse. It doesn't sound forced or contrived at all. The sentence constructs are really nice as well. There's a good flow, there's a good rhythm, there's a good voice to it because there's no redundancy in the sentence construct, and same in sample number 2. So our struggling and emerging writers, I find, tend to overuse what is called the short simple declarative sentence or the independent clause. So it sounds like da-dot, 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 in their rhythm and their flow, or their lack of rhythm and flow. So when students are able to know how to manipulate those 12 sentence constructs from rule number 18 in Strunk and White, you get things like this. When you do intensive word study academies, intensive nuance academies, this is what's going to happen, right? So this is, ultimately where we want our kids to be. And I know post 2022 AP Lit exam, a lot of teachers are like, holy cow, what do I have to do to get the sophistication point? How do I teach sophistication? This is it. So just do some nuance, some basic rules, and pour it on heavy and focus on it, and the kids will get there. At least the ones that work and give you an iota of effort. So here's one more done the exact same way. 3 sentences, authorial intent. 4th sentence, construction of meaning. Nostalgia is a very human trait, but when one repeatedly overlooks their shoulder, the past often gets distorted. When golden ages are idealized to the point of entrapping an individual, they have a hard time living in the present moment with any degree of contentment. Oftentimes, nostalgia tends to overlook objective reality and spins past events beyond rosy and ideal. We're at the 4th sentence. And again, look at the manipulation of the syntax here. This is especially true of the grandmother in that her nostalgic perspective of what it means to be good blurs her vision of her own skewed sense of what it means to be good. And these are all done the exact same way, the exact same template. 3 sentences, authorial intent. 1 sentence, construction of meaning. Always invert, focus on the tier 2, focus on the sentence constructs. Every single time a student does FRQ1 or FRQ2, they can do this, and it totally demystifies the process. So they will intuitively, instinctually know what to do out of the gate. So it's just a matter of them being able to read the stories and the poems correctly, ascertaining meaning. So our next question is this: how do I write the body paragraphs? And the answer is simple. We're going to proceed syllogistically. So those of you that viewed my lottery writing workshop, I did Death by Scrabble, and I got a few other short stories in my YouTube channel. I don't remember offhand. Edgar Allan Poe. I got a couple of Edgar Allan Poes in there. It's all done the exact same way. So proceed syllogistically. So let's break down what that means, and we'll just review it. For those of you that this is your first time seeing it in the YouTube channel, there are deeper dives into the syllogistic method in several other videos. If this still is nebulous for you after this brief explanation. So the syllogistic method is rooted in the Aristotelian tradition, and Aristotle ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich, boys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, word wrangling, wordsmithing, basically kind of like what our law schools do today. And they would throw out these juicy questions like, what is justice? And some of you might be familiar with the work Plato's Republic. So the whole book is centered around that essential question: what is justice? And these great philosophical thinkers come to the mic and they drop their definition. They say, aha, I got it. I'm the smartest. I'm the bestest. And then the other scholars huddle up and they found all the, the holes in the logic and the deficits in the reasoning. And Aristotle said, just like us, I got to teach these kids how to sustain clear lines of reasoning. He called it cogency. And one day he had a eureka moment and he said, aha, that's it. My really good orators think mathematically, they think computatively, they are supremely cogent. And what they're doing is making syllogisms. So I'll give you an example here. A syllogism is just basically working from premise to conclusion. So if I say in premise 1, arsenic is deadly, follow it up by premise number 2, my dog ate arsenic, conclusion, my dog is going to die, we would all nod our heads and say, yeah, that makes total perfect sense. Like, that is unfortunate for the dog, but yeah, that's definitely cogent right there. That's, some bulletproof logic. So when our students write, we want them to be this deliberate and this mathematic. And one of the things I'm going to do in the coming in some forthcoming videos is take a look at College Board sample papers and show that most students fall into the trap of only presenting the second premise when they write for FRQ 1, 2, and 3. It's across the board. They fall into plot analysis instead of meeting the demands of the assignment and performing literary analysis. So it's all plot. They just sort of regurgitate what they read and paraphrase. So we got to get them out of that habit, and this template works nice to break them of that. So the first premise is going to be an argument containing the terms and or devices. The second premise is the textual support, and it's where we teeter-totter balance the quoting and the paraphrasing. And the conclusion of the body paragraph, so not the conclusion of the essay, but the conclusion of the body paragraph is where the textual analysis is housed. And I tell my students all the time, the first premise is a promise. You got to go shake hands with that brother. Go echo the prompt, go echo the thesis in the end. So everything just sort of links back, comes full circle. So let's talk about this here. The first premise is always going to be 3 sentences long, and here's the reason why I do this. And it's very scaffolded, it's very training wheel, but in early learning of how to do composition, I do this for a reason. So on FRQ 1 on the AP Lang exam, the College Board states your argument must be central. They say it 3 times. And one of the things that I really enforce with my students and teachers that I work with is that all expository writing is an active argument. And even though we're performing literary analysis, we have to argue. And we have to argue using the terms and devices. So I like to have that argument be central, therefore 3 sentences to establish it. So students often ask, where do I begin my analysis? And I say start right where the author starts. Go chronologically through the story. Indicate to your reader that you have a very clear chronology, a clear sequence, and that you're going to be supremely logical, and then just hammer it out. So early in the story, what terms, devices do you see at play? What does the author use to construct meaning? And systematically go through it. So let's take a look at these first 3 sentences. In A Good Man is Hard to Find, the grandmother and misfit live by moral codes that govern and determine their decision-making, actions, and perceptions. The term moral doesn't necessarily mean good. It's simply a code of conduct, while the righteousness of a person's morals is entirely subjective. Although at first glance the misfit's code seems to be misguided, to say the least, it is actually the grandmother's code that proves to be falsely contrived and inconsistent. So in this implicit, you're getting into the characterization and the theme of the story. So you don't even have to say the terms or devices. Just you implying is fine. So like for literary or for rhetorical analysis, I don't like it when my students say ethos, pathos, logos. It's just better to imply it than to be so forthright. So second premise begins at the 4th sentence. Go get your support and go get your analysis. Be chronological, be sequential. The grandmother's hat, which she wears for the sole purpose of showing that she is a lady, represents her misguided moral code in that her collars and cuffs were white organdy trimmed with lace, and at her neckline she had pinned a purple spray of cloth violets containing a sachet. In case of an accident, anyone seeing her dead on the highway would know at once she was a lady. Now, I don't like that quote. It fits, it's germane, it's relevant to the promise of the first premise, but man, it's a huge quote. And ideally, I want to get my students away from quote dumping like that. So that's the one big flaw I see in this. Otherwise, it's really good. That quote could be really parceled down into the nitty-gritty. So we quoted, we got to analyze it. The narrator explains that the grandmother dressed for the family road trip with appearance, not comfort, in mind. The rest of her family wears casual attire reflecting a difference in either generation or personality. The grandmother presumably does not really believe she is likely to die in an accident, so she is really dressing to reflect her own sense of self, right? So all of this was promised in that first premise. So it's germane, it's linked. If we start talking about other quotes, other paraphrases that go outside that umbrella concept of the first premise, then we have logical fallacies and we've broken the line of reasoning. So we have to stay focused here. We have to keep the promise of the first premise. However, her preoccupation with how she will be perceived when dead shows that she cares more about outward signifiers of class than inner virtue. Otherwise, she would care more about how she appeared to God when dead than to passing drivers. The misfit, on the other hand, governs his thoughts and actions by a different set of moral codes, codes that are more authentic and genuine. Well, let's talk about the chronology here in the sequence. Do you see how here we talk about the grandmother first and then the misfit? You have to do the same here. Talk about the grandmother first and then move on to the misfit, right? So everything has to have an order, has to have a sequence for line of reasoning. Now, it's been a while since we quoted, and this story is actually hard to quote because it's so like dialogue driven. So I like it when students teeter-totter balance the quoting and paraphrasing. So there's a lot more paraphrasing than quoting in this, but it's okay. It's okay for this particular story. In reflecting back upon his childhood and how those days inform his present circumstances, the misfit says, "No, ma'am, I ain't a good man, but I ain't the worst in the world neither. My daddy said I was a different breed of dog from my brothers and sisters. You know, daddy said it's some that can live their whole life out without asking about it, and it's others has to know why it is. And this boy is one of the latters. He's going to be into everything." Right? So again, big quote, big quote. So that's the one downside of this writer is their quotes are a little bit too big, and I like it when they're conversational and fully embedded. So that's one thing I would work on this student with. But otherwise, in terms of manipulating the template, really good. So we have that big quote. We just can't dump it in the middle of our essay. Let's keep the promise of the first premise. Let's keep that line of reasoning going. While the grandmother does not ask the larger questions of life, the misfit wants to understand life to know why it is. The father seemed to have an inkling that such curiosity could be problematic for his son. As readers learn later, needing to understand life and by extension death and whether an afterlife exists stirred in the misfit a spiritual crisis, which in turn inspired his criminal behavior. All right, so we got lots of textual support and analysis for both the misfit and the grandmother. In the end here, let's go shake hands with that first premise, echo the thesis, link it back to the prompt. In terms of moral conduct, it is better to be true to one's convictions than it is to blindly follow some arbitrary social decrees. Even though the misfit, at face value, roots his sense of self in criminal activity, he's actually a more deeply moral character than the grandmother due to his authenticity and forthrightness. So big paragraph. Usually I tell students to cap it at 12 sentences. I think this one went to 14. It's okay. It's okay. So you still can see manifest in it how to manipulate the template to arrive at that line of reasoning. So students ask, what do I do next? You still have the whole rest of the story to analyze. Switch up your lit terms, bust out another syllogism, get new quotes, get new paraphrases. So that's just a quick writing workshop on how we tackle that particular short story. So I'll be doing others in the coming weeks per request. And got some good news, and I think most of you have probably heard that the National Writing Project has hired me as a lead teacher to teach my Teach It Right 5-week mastermind through them. This is good news because it's deeply discounted. It's $350 versus what I was charging. Uh, they don't have all my overhead fees, my web fees, and my course, retainer fees, and all of that stuff. And you also get 10 hours of professional development. They have badges. So for those of you that need, your PD hours, you can get that right through the National Writing Project, and yours truly will be your fearless teacher for those 5 weeks. So we're going to be running those consistently throughout the 2022-2023 school year on a regular cadence. So pay attention to that. Lots of folks have said it's hard to make a 5-week commitment. Still, we are going to offer a self-paced course as well. I'm in the midst of recording that at the time of sitting down for this video. The other thing, as we kick off the 2022-2023 school year, I'll be doing free webinars with Perfection Learning on a monthly cadence. And if you want these slides or want any more information on the irons I have in the fire, reach out, teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. Probably the best place to get information about the Teach It Right 5-week Mastermind is National Writing Project, nwp.org, or you can visit my webpage at www.teachinghowtowrite.com. So hope you enjoyed this and hope it's useful. For now, happy teaching, happy writing.